Alright, today we're going to talk about Chapter 32, and Chapter 32 is on monetary policy. Yesterday we discussed the three tools that the Fed has in its monetary toolbox. That would be open market operations, which is the buying and selling of bonds or U.S. Treasuries, the changing the reserve requirement, and changing the discount rate or the federal funds rate. Yesterday we talked that these things shift the money supply. The Fed is in charge of setting the money supply. Central banks set the money supply in their economy. And we said that those can shift the money supply by increasing or decreasing the money supply. Today we're going to talk about what that causes and how it's an appropriate reaction to a recessionary or inflationary gap. Our second most important model when it comes to AP macro is the money market, and that's what this market is. I'll give you about 60 seconds to go ahead and copy it down. All right, make sure you have the correctly labeled X and Y axis and you have the curves looking like I have. All right, so there's two entities here that are really important. Remember that the money supply is set by the Fed, and money demand is from households. And so the Fed sets the money supply. It is a perfectly inelastic curve. And what that means is as they shift it to the left and the right, the equilibrium interest rate can change. And this is what monetary policy is about. Monetary policy is entirely driven by the equilibrium interest rate. The reason is interest rate is a key component into multiple parts of GDP, which are the determinants of the aggregate demand curve. When the interest rate goes down, households consume and invest more. With a cheaper interest rate, that means payments on things like homes and cars and credit cards and vacations get cheaper, which means that the aggregate demand would increase because we would go on more vacations and buy more cars and buy more homes. If the interest rate increases, that means that consumption and investment would go down because our payments on homes and cars would go up. So the Fed can use its ability to manipulate the nominal interest rate to act as sort of a throttle for how much we consume and invest. In a recession, they want to throttle it up, so they would want to lower interest rates. And in an economy experiencing inflation, they would want to throttle it down. They would want less consumption and less investment. So they would want to increase interest rate to discourage or disincentivize those activities. So I'll give you about 90 seconds to go ahead and draw an economy using a correctly labeled aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph. Draw an economy in a recession. So here we go. Here we have an economy in recession. You'll see that the equilibrium GDP located right here is below the natural rate. This is an economy that needs to be heated up, right? We need to prescribe policies that will increase the aggregate demand curve or shift it to the right. So taking a look back at our money market graph, remember the Fed is in charge of the money supply. So they can shift that vertical line to the right or to the left depending on what the appropriate policy is. So in an economy in a recession, we want to do the Fed would want to do what we call expansionary monetary policy, or expand the money supply, shift the money supply over here to the right to MS2. This would be expansionary monetary policy, right? Expand, grow the money supply. And it's not about because the money supply changes. It's about the point here. The reason they're doing that is because the nominal interest rate drops. And when the nominal interest rate drops, households will increase their consumption and increase their investment, meaning we buy more cars, we buy more homes, we go on more vacations, we take on more credit card debt. They're incentivizing us because of the decrease in interest rate here. They're incentivizing us to do those things more. I just want to quickly review what increases and decreases the money supply when it comes to the three Fed tools. All right, remember to increase the money supply, they buy bonds. So you want to link those two words together. Increase the money supply, buy bonds from the public. That would decrease interest rate, increase consumption, increase investment. That would be the appropriate response, the appropriate monetary response to a recessionary gap. It heats up the economy. A decrease in the money supply is when the Fed sells bonds. That would shift the money supply to the left, increasing the nominal interest rate, decreasing consumption, decreasing investment. That acts to cool off the economy. That's something that should be done in an inflationary period. The second lever knob that the Fed has is by manipulation of the discount rate. The Fed could increase the discount rate, and that would decrease the money supply. That would raise interest rates, lowering consumption and lowering investment. That again is an appropriate response to an inflationary period. By decreasing the discount rate, the Fed increases the money supply, shifts it to the right. That would decrease the interest rate, increasing consumption and increasing investment. Again, that's the appropriate response for an economy experiencing a recession or a recessionary gap. The final tool in their toolbox is the reserve requirement. The reserve requirement isn't used very often, but it in theory would work. Increasing the reserve requirement decreases the money supply. If I shift the money supply to the left, that would increase the interest rate and decrease consumption, decrease investment. Again, that's the appropriate policy for an inflationary gap. Decreasing the reserve requirement increases the money supply because banks can loan out more money. That would decrease the nominal interest rate, increase consumption, increase investment. That's the appropriate monetary response to a recessionary gap. Here are 3 FRQs that I want you to attempt with the rest of class today as well as for homework. All right. 2005 Form B, I only want you to look at Part A and D. 2002 number 1, only do D and E, and then I want you to do all of 2004 number 3. All of these problems have something to do with monetary policy. You can use your notes and work in groups of up to 3. The rubrics to these FRQs will be posted on Edmodo later tonight.